Excellent. Okay, lots of you are here now. Let's start the webinar. The big quit. Where are we at with the Great Resignation and what to expect going forward? As many of you guys know, we also had a couple of webinars on the Great Resignation. It's been a huge topic in 2021, whereas in 2022, we're seeing, quiet quitting, the big quit, and many different ways of the quitting quietly. And we want to talk about that and see how can we discuss this issue, go in depth in different topics, and then get your questions in terms of what's important for you to know and how you can, have your employees and contractors be more engaged so that they don't quiet quit on you. Charles, we have some great panelists today. We have Oyster, we have Browork, and Ben. And we'll call them onto the panel pretty soon here. But first, why am I here and why am I qualified to lead this webinar? My name is Lana. I am the head of revenue at SafetyWing. I'm also a Y Combinator founder myself, an advisor to many different companies, and the EU for Innovation. I'm a remote worker and a big enthusiast of it because I discovered it back in 2008. And I thought it was the best thing possible because it allowed me the ultimate freedom and flexibility to live the best life possible. And now I continue to live this remote work from anywhere life with my family. And it's really been life-changing. And I would not go back for any price or any benefit that someone might offer me in the office. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. Who is SafetyWing? So many of you don't know us. We are creating the global benefits for remote workers and distributed teams. What that means really, in the next slide, you'll see that we have health insurance. We are building remote pensions or retirement, life and disability, parental leave, income protection, and many more things to really complete that global benefits package that usually companies need to give their employees and contractors. Let's go to the next slide. So today's agenda, we're going to have a quick poll. Some of you that have attended this before, you know what this poll is about. It's to figure out how many of you work in different locations or in the office. Then we'll go into a panel discussion and then into the Q&A. Please keep in mind that sometimes there's a lot of questions at the end, so make sure to get your questions in early. That way we know how much room to leave during discussion for questions. I love to leave a lot of room for questions because this is the most important part where you get the most out of it. I want this to be interactive and to be fun for you as well. So let's start with a poll, Charles. And by the way, Charles is helping me. He is the backbone of the webinar series here, and you won't see his face, but you might hear him call out the questions later. Okay, so the question is your organization borderless? And you can select one of the following. Would be very cool to see what you guys think. Okay, did everybody vote? All right. So we have 37% that is no, and we don't have any plans. But then we have a big percentage that is yes, and they're in more than 2 countries. And then some that want to become borderless, which is cool. Okay, this is great. It's nice to have all kinds of different points of view here. So without further ado, I will invite our panelists to the stage, and then we'll start on the questions. Hi, Carlos.
Hello,
David.
Hello, hello.
Welcome. Yeah, if you can go maybe Carlos first, David, and then Bruno, if you can tell us a bit more about yourself and what makes you qualified to be in this webinar, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Lana. Yeah, so my name is Carlos Escutia. I'm the founder and CEO of Browork. It's a platform that enables companies to manage older equipment in 150 countries.
Amazing. Awesome. Hey, everybody. My name is David. I'm one of the co-founders and COO at Ben. So Ben, we are a flexible automated benefits administration platform specifically for global teams as well. So obviously relevant to be speaking today. And effectively, we help global companies to manage all their benefits like safety wings in one place while letting employees choose whatever it is that works for them. And really excited to talk to you about because we see a lot of trends in the market, especially as employees are thinking about and employers what benefits to offer in different places to deal with retention and what's been happening in the market recently.
Hey everyone, so my name is Bruno. I'm on the partnerships team at Oyster. Essentially, we're a global employment platform that enables companies to employ people in over 180 countries. Excuse me. I also been working remotely since 2018, so it's been a while now. I'm currently in New York, but usually based in Portugal, and so I'm really excited about discussing this panel. A lot of different topics. I mean, as Oyster, our own team has grown from 30 to 650 while I've been here, but also we've seen a lot of different companies working with us and having like questions and a lot of different talking points about this big resignation and the quiet quitting and everything. So definitely excited to chat more about this today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, some of you I know very well, and some not so well, but I'm very, very excited to see what you guys will say today with some of the things we have prepared. So the first thing I want to start the conversation with is what are the predictions on the future of the global job market? We've seen in the US, with the stock market being a bit in the dumps, as well as everything in the crypto space. And the Fed continues to raise the interest rates to try to stabilize inflation. So what are you predicting is going to happen? Because, in 2021, we saw that a lot of the power lied in the hands of the employee and the contractor. Do you think because the markets are down and there is a threat to the global economy, do you think that might shift, to the employer? And really, should that balance shift or not? So I'd love to hear and maybe start with a conversation, whoever wants to go first, and we can go from there.
I can jump in and provide a perspective, right? So I think definitely there's more nervousness in the market now, and I think we see that with both kind of our own hiring as well as when we're helping clients to figure out what to offer where. And people are definitely being more cautious on what they're doing. Personally, I think the job market is still really, really hot, and is going to be hot for a while. And we see that, but it's going to impact different companies differently, right? So it's a question of supply and demand, and the pendulum is constantly swinging. Lona, kind of you mentioned, right, some of these things around. There's good stuff that's going on, right? So there's a lot of pent-up consumer demand. The real economy is proving resilient, and like people are constantly. I think the media is kind of overblowing a lot of these things, but jobs data is like surprisingly positive. Like I kind of hear this conflicting view of, hey, things are really bad on the one hand. On the other hand, the experience is completely different, I think, for a lot of companies. And at the same time, like you have the central banks, right? It just rose rates yesterday, I think, right? So it's definitely contracting, but it's more of, I think, a reversal to the mean. I think like the things couldn't have kept going the way they were going, right? Like things were just nuts in 2021, I think, in terms of the hiring. So I think in summary, we'll see a bit of a slowdown, but it's more a reversion to the mean because the last 2 years were just insane from a job market perspective. That's my personal view.
Yeah, like regarding that, what David said, just to jump in here, I definitely feel like, yeah, obviously a lot of things have been going on. It's been quite a eventful last 2.5 years, but also at the same time, like David said, I think even reversing to the mean is still going up and to the right? And in a lot of ways, even with a lot of the situation that's going on, with a lot of massive layoffs at different companies as well, which it shakes the whole market in a lot of ways. At the same time, we still see a shortage of knowledge workers, right, in other companies. And so one of the things I don't think one of the predictions that I have to share is that I don't think the employers will take the driver's seat anytime soon, because even when you get a massive layoff at a company, well, you know, I could give any example, but any big company, for example, in the tech space, that person is definitely more than qualified to find another job. We're in a very lucky position in that sense, and obviously that's not with every sector in the world, and we are in a privileged situation. Probably people that are here at this webinar are in these tech jobs, otherwise they probably wouldn't be in a webinar during their workday. But it's sort of like one of those things that I feel like we're still very much in a bubble in that sense, and a lot of the things we're still very anti-fragile in a way. So I think that is definitely a big impact. The other thing that I think it will come a lot from these past few years with all these changes is that there will be more a bigger capitalization on results over FaceTime. And I think not just with the rise of remote work, but also because, you know, like technology has enabled so much optimization in so many ways and enable so many people to work from all over the world. Like at Oyster, we're over 70 countries as a company, but also because results is what matters. And I think that's another one of the things that employers won't be able to take the driver's seat, because flexibility is now something that people are used to, but also because people have other priorities in life, right? And when sometimes people think about work-life balance, they think of a dichotomy when there's one and there's the other. And I think now has to be a bigger, embracement of like different things in life and how they work together in a more of a balanced way, and basically one just sort of melts into the other. And then so all these sort of things will come forward with results, because a tech worker still brings a lot, as an individual, brings a lot of results to a company. And so I think that will always be more important than ever than a 9-to-5 job, for example, in an office space where everyone could just basically see that everyone is in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that there's been a fundamental shift, right? From being a location centric to being a people centric kind of focus, right? And so I think the organizations have learned over the last 2 years that they can do that work from anywhere, people and organizations. And so what we are seeing, at least here at GrowWork, with the customers that we serve, is that there's a lot of cost optimization by, hey, let's reduce our headcount in certain region, but let's hire in certain other region, right? And so that's happening a lot with engineering teams that we serve, right, today. So and so to David's and Bruno's point, we don't see a slowdown. We see more of a reorganization, but things are growing and accelerating.
I think, yeah, I mean, just to build up on some of these things, right? Like as ever, it's really hard looking at macro averages and being like, hey, like the market is going to go do well or poorly. I think it's going to impact different companies in different geographies differently, right? And so if you're in tech and we're seeing this, right, there's a huge lull. There's an investor flight to safety, like the end of cheap money, companies extending their runway, doing a lot of layoffs, that kind of thing. At the same time, like, some roles, as Bruno, I think Carlos mentioned, are incredibly high demand, right, and really still difficult to hire for. So it really depends on where you are, what kind of company you are. Retail, hospitality, manufacturing, right, is still going through. It's like, I think it still has the highest openings, like a job openings that it's had since 1960s or something crazy like that. So again, I think it's really kind of a misnomer or challenging to look at it from a macro view, and you have to deep down into the detail actually to look at how it's going to impact different companies and different industries and different geographies. Yeah, that's just to build up on that.
That's a great point. All three of you guys made. For us at SafetyWing, we have 100% retention and nobody has left yet. So I think it's important to note that when when you hire people, depending what you are offering them, also will affect this big quit, right? So if they have been driven so hard in the last couple of years, which we saw with 2021 people, and 2020 they were locked inside, they were working really hard, we saw productivity go through the roof, but that also has a limit, right? People cannot run at that high rate for so long. So I think even this, like the media is blowing it up, but actually it's maybe like a little bit of a step back. And like Bruno said, like some people trying to take control over their life and what's important to them, and not putting work like a 24/7 type thing as the priority in their life. And of course they saw with the pandemic and so many people dying, so many people losing things and jobs and people, that what is important. They had to like question things. And that's why a lot of companies that are doing things based on what they think should be the right thing to do might lose a lot of talent versus asking your people and seeing, okay, what do you guys want out of this new generation of kind of like employee relationship? You can't just think like, oh, we just have to go back to what it was, because no one can go back to that. And that's what we have to look at and see, okay, if we're having a lot of brain drain, if people are leaving, if people are quiet quitting, why is that happening? Are we changing things in our company that are for the benefit of the employee and contractor? Or are we changing them to benefit only the company? So that's really important to note, and really take stock of that so that you're able to adjust and really benefit from this time to attract great talent. Like David was saying, there's incredible talent out there, and now it could be even a good time to really choose the best, because you don't have to hire so many at the same time, which you had to in 2021.
Yeah, definitely. I think other things, like you both mentioned, like the media and how some of these news have been blowing up, and like the quiet quitting, for example, that I read a lot from different media outlets. It's a very different perspective that a lot of people have, and it feels like for a lot of people, like the quiet quitting just means having a job. It's just setting boundaries in their life. And when I read some of those news, it's kind of like, well, not everyone is like someone that just puts their career in front of their life, right? And some people are more ambitious than others, and that's fine, right? Different people have different goals in life, and first of all, you should never be measured by the hours you work. And obviously, if you're an ambitious person and if you want to go the extra mile and go extra of what your job maybe relies upon you, then good, do it if that makes you happy. Like, I'm a person that likes to go over the 100% of what been decided to do on my job, but not everyone can be like that, and a lot of people have other priorities in their life, like kids, elderly parents to take care, whatever it may be, right? And so I think like a lot of these situations is kind of like employers took a little bit of advantage of the pandemic situation where everyone was closed at home, and a lot of people, including myself, felt quite grateful in having a job that I could still do on a day-to-day basis. And in a lot of ways was like, well, should I watch another Netflix episode, or I could just work a little bit longer, right? And so it's very easy, like all these sort of things to happen. And I know like a lot of people now are back on their previous lives, of pre-pandemic lives, and it's sort of like, well, now it's kind of like setting boundaries also good, right? And a lot of people were working remotely, and now they're back in the office, and going back to the office and work from 9 till 9 p.m. is not something that it's doable anymore. And so I think a lot of employers expected their employees to bring like 150% and cut back on hiring another person because that person would do a little bit more. And I think employers will likely have to continue to adapt their policies to retain and recruit top talent in that sense, because it's candidates, like especially really good candidates in the tech space, have a lot of leverage on their side, and what they can bring to the job doesn't mean it has to be exploited, right? And I think that there's that balance that you need to find, and it's something that you need to continue to refine, because sometimes what you ask in the early stage startup is not the same as you'll ask in a startup with 2,000 people or 10,000 people. And so I think it's very important that you keep always look out in the market. You have the right people in the workplace HR side of things, making sure that people are happy, engagement is good, but also that people have a balance in their life. Because even if you're pushing that people for over 1 year, that's not sustainable over 3-4 years. And then that's when people start quitting. And then there's a situation like now where it's super important to keep and retain the good people that you have, and make sure that we're bringing balance in the company that stays stable. And that's when people start to leave, right? And so I think it's very, very important to look at those signs as well.
So then this kind of gets us into kind of like the next question is, what is the most overlooked employee retention strategy that you guys have seen at your companies, but other companies that you advise for?
Yeah. So it's exactly that. I think flexibility is key. Employees demand it, right? It's not a nice to have anymore. It's not you cannot impose to an employee, especially those that are really good at what they do, because they will always have flexibility and opportunities to find alternative job offers or opportunities elsewhere that can provide that, right? And we're seeing this internally. We're able to attract right now talent from tier 1 technology companies that otherwise we wouldn't be able to, because we simply provide that flexibility, right? And so the value of providing a flexibility to a team member to work from anywhere, and as Bruno was saying before, focus on results rather on the hours that you have to put in every day. That's kind of the paradigm shift that exists today, and companies need to know that that is there, and they need to adapt to in order to be able to track the best, right?
Great. So flexibility is one. David, Bruno, what's another one?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we think about it, so we've done a lot of research on the topic, and it boils down to like 2-3 things, which is, first of all, like compensation, right? People care about their compensation. Obviously, that's fixed, that's variable, that's equity, that's benefits, that's everything that's in there. How are companies rewarding their employees, right? The second one is like development opportunities, career progression, all that kind of things, like growing as a professional, right? Helping people to do their best work, essentially. And then the third, as Carlos was saying, has to do with like the company mission, the culture, the flexible working, that kind of element, right? And I mean, we deal with compensation benefits on a day-to-day basis, so that's maybe where I could provide a little bit of perspective, where kind of the way that we see a lot of employers using this is, for example, thinking about, hey, a lot of companies are dealing with this inflationary pressure, right? Like inflation is 8%, 10% in some cases, and what are you going to do? Are you going to increase everybody's salaries by 8 or 10%? Like companies can't increase their prices at the same rate, right? So what we see a lot of companies doing is things like cost of living adjustments, or providing allowances for certain things that are not contractual in nature and don't trickle down to benefits like pension or different things, right, which are usually based on a multiple of salary. So you can do other types of compensation and then see how that plays out, right? To saying, hey, here's a cost of living adjustment, here's the thing, and then over time you can adjust what the actual fixed salary would be. Tying compensation more closely with like team and company performance in a transparent way, I think is really important. And a lot of companies are moving things from what would be fixed to like variable type of things. I mean, letting employees choose how they want to be paid, right? Is it different types of benefits? Is it weekly? You have a lot of players like doing things like earned wage access and things like that, giving people who are struggling access to their pay ahead of their payroll cycle, right? So you have some companies doing those things, using sign-on bonuses. Obviously, benefits is a key one. Like thinking of basically other non-salary ways of tying that to reward. So maybe I'll stop there, but there's a bunch of other stuff that we could go into. But like compensation and benefits is what I know. So I figured I'd provide that perspective.
Yeah, that is definitely a good perspective, David. I definitely agree with everything you said in that point. I think the one of the most overlooked retention strategy is free pizza and ping pong tables. No, I'm just kidding. It's just those things are over. I think like what I agree a lot with what David and Carlos said, which is not taking a cookie cutter approach to benefits, for example, and to solutions to the employees. When you have a base of employees that it's like, in our case, for example, at Royster, 650 people, it's impossible to find one thing that fits everyone, right? And so I think like to add to what David said, I think the biggest important thing, and something that I definitely appreciate at Oyster, has been to take a people first approach and ask, right? We constantly get asked about what type of benefits do we want? What type of things can we change? What type of things can we improve? And I think having that and learning to grow with that and refining that strategy, as I mentioned before, I think that's what's most important, because what is a good retention strategy today will probably not be the same next year, as we could probably see like what is right now is not the same as it was last year. And so it's a fast moving market in a lot of different situations, and this is another one. It's just like continue to ask is really important, in my opinion.
And I mean, a lot of it's all personal, right? As in like what works for different people and for different companies won't work for others, right? So when it comes to that flexibility element, I think it's super important. And we see a lot of companies who are thinking about it in that way of saying, hey, here's the different elements that you can, and here's how you can choose, right? You can kind of construct your own work lifestyle, and giving the employees the autonomy and the choice, I think, is like the thing that a lot of companies don't actually think enough about, of saying, hey, you know yourself the best out of everybody, so choose the things that work for you and will make you the most productive, the most engaged, and whatever works for you.
Yeah, we do something similar as well, like where we have like a planning and prioritization meeting every 6 months about benefits. So basically people will vote on a bunch of them, and then we'll see what comes up as the top 3, and then we'll implement those, of course, within reason. What we've also done in the past is that, well, we're still doing that, is that when we hit certain milestone revenues, so like millions of dollars, then the salary goes up X%
Oh,
for
nice.
everyone in the company. So that has been kind of nice as well, because everybody's like, oh yeah, we hit this milestone and we get paid a little bit more. What I want to mention though here is that a lot of times people will give stipends for health insurance. But what I've seen is that usually people don't figure it out on themselves on their own, because it's really difficult to do and very complicated. And usually they need a company to negotiate for them and get a better price. So I would say definitely use someone, obviously like SafetyWing, but also Oyster or Ben, where you can get a better negotiated price for the entire team and not leave it up to them. Because if you just give them a stipend, and let's say, God forbid, they have cancer or something, and they're not covered, then you could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in productivity on that person or more. So we see a lot of companies say, oh yeah, I just provide a stipend, like $100 a month, but it's not equal to really solving the problem for them. So definitely see what is important for them, and then give them something that a lot of people are giving them as well. So to be competitive, look at the benefits that are offered around you. What are competitors offering? That way you can make sure that you're staying on top of the game versus being behind. Cool.
It's a really good point, Lona, just to add on that, in terms of what we see as companies doing is, when it comes to benefits and things like that, you want to provide a core level of coverage or something that will just, as Lona was saying, like you're getting that element of, the group pricing, the economies of scales or things like that, and then give the employees the flexibility of doing things. So like there's a baseline, right? And I think that's sometimes overlooked as well, in terms of companies just saying, hey, why don't we just give people an extra 100 quid on their salary, or $100 on their salary? That's not the same, right? And it kind of easily gets lost. So yeah.
Cool. So then one more question from here, a couple more. So when can it be a positive opportunity? When turnover can be a positive opportunity, can it be a good thing? Have you guys seen this? So when people do quit, is that good for the company or not? I just want to hear from you guys when you can turn that turnover into like an opportunity.
Right. I can get started with that. So I believe that somebody mentioned this earlier, but a lot of companies are building kind of their own cultures, right? And whenever turnovers occur, it's an opportunity to adjust, right? And in other words, we're seeing right now, for example, companies that are forcing employees to go back to the office. A lot of them are going to leave the organization, right? But there's some employees that do want to work from an office, that they believe that they thrive in an office environment, and that they're self-selecting themselves to be part of that environment. And so the company is building a culture around office that will attract employees that want to work in an office, right? And so that is the opportunity. A lot of employees that do not want that want the flexibility, that will just jump ship and go somewhere else, right? And I see that there's a lot of adjustments around that. I think that if we extrapolate what's happening today, the trends that have been developing over the last 2-3 years to the next 2-3 years, that's exactly what's going to end up happening. You're going to see the camp of companies that are working in an office, and you're going to see the camp that is fully distributed or hybrid, most likely fully distributed, just as is our case, right? Yeah, so that's how I see things happening.
It's interesting.
I mean,
Bruno or David?
Yeah, from my perspective, in terms of, yeah, I mean, it's hard when it's not the company's choice, right? Which is what you mean by turnovers and like an employee leaving. At the same time, it always does, as I think Carlos was mentioning, like give you the opportunity to rethink. Hey, are we doing the right things here, right? Do we have the company orged in the right way? Is this an opportunity to rethink how we do it, to invest in like automation and efficiency and some of these things, and do that, as opposed to hiring people to take over the job, right? So I think it just gives people the opportunity to pause a little bit and say, okay, right, if somebody has chosen to leave, why, right? Let's stop and think about this, and then we'll reassess. Hey, do we even need to hire that specific role, or can we move it to somewhere else, or can we take somebody in who's already working in a different team, promote them, right, reskill them because somebody is unhappy in another different part of the organization? So there are definitely opportunities in there. But I think there's a ton of challenges on how to manage that effectively, right? And if not done right, it could be really, really bad as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess like to add a little bit to that, I do see a lot of the points that, like, for example, Carlos has mentioned, but for me it's also like it all starts with the hiring process. Then it's like, if you have a plan to go back to the office, why don't you bring that forward right away as in the interview process, right? Instead of going through situations where the
100%.
people are leaving now because you've taken that approach. Is like, communicate that in advance, because I think obviously I'm not in a leadership type of role, like chief C-level exec role, in that sense of building that part of the business, but also at the same time, as an employee and someone that's been through multiple startups from a very early stage, it's kind of like, you never want to see a colleague of yours go, right? And so it's kind of like, it's very hard to see that as a positive opportunity, unless it's like that person's actually taking on a better role and a better opportunity with a new job. But also at the same time, then you'll think about, why am I not doing that as well, right? And so it's kind of like, it's always a tricky thing, because ego gets always involved in those situations. And I think what as much as I like to see my colleagues take on better opportunities, if that's the situation, or sometimes, had to leave something, because some job, because you're in a location and you have to move countries because of some personal reason or whatever. Well, the way I like to see it is more like, try to understand and try to be very upfront, right when you're hiring, right when you're communicating your mission and your values, to see that you are attracting actually the right people, right? Because that's like, I think that's the most important thing. Maybe I'm a bit romantic on this side of things, but I'm one that believes that you should work in a company where you believe the mission, where you actually are a bit, and as much as you can be passionate about a tech product, in our case can be. And that's something that, for me, it gets me going to work in a company like Oyster, where I see myself in the vision, where I worked remotely before the pandemic, and I saw that this is something that changed my life and could change other people's lives. And I think that is very important, that you attract like-minded people to work on that, because it's also like, it's a big chunk of your day. Like I mentioned before, I see the work-life balance as a mix of different things, and not like two separate things. And so I want to work at something that I actually feel passionate about, and I want other people to feel the same. And so it's kind of more to look at things that way, in my point of view.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well, Bruno. And what I just wanted to add, one more thing, is that make sure that when you post a job posting, that if it's a remote job, you say where it is remote from, or as well as if it's a work from anywhere type of situation, because a lot of employers will put remote, but actually it's not really that remote. It's working from home or within like a certain radius of where you are. So you might also get some mismatches there. Even though you want to attract the right talent, you might not be attracting the right talent.
Yeah.
So
And even
definitely
time zones. Sorry to add to that, Alana, but like, I think it's like very important. Like, for example, if you have like core hours for meetings times, like someone that based in Europe will work a lot with a North American team, to have an idea that a lot of calls are going to happen at the end of the day, right? And you got to be very upfront about those things, because those people, like that might impact their lives in ways they can and they can't. So try, like, for example, at Oyster, we try to be a lot of async communications, but there's roles that's impossible, right? And so, and even being async, I think it's important to have times where you meet people and you chat and you bounce back ideas. And so having, like, for example, remote within these certain time zones, I think it's also fine, because it's kind of like, try to understand and give everyone the most information possible, to make sure that we have like a good perspective on the job and that person that is coming to. It's not like figuring out on the first day of the job, oh wait, all my calls are booked from 7 to 9 p.m. What is going on, right? Stuff like that, for example.
Definitely. Yeah, the last thing I was going to add was that also onboarding has to be done correctly. So a lot of companies miss on that. That's why they'll have a lot of turnover. So if you just kind of like get someone hired, and then your onboarding process is not up to the level, they will also leave. I know like GitHub or GitLab has like, I don't know, something like 400 different tasks you have to do when you get hired, something crazy like that. So it doesn't have to be that, but like something that works for you, and that you make this experience really great and fun, and they know what are the most important things that should be working on and what success looks like. It's really important, and a lot of companies miss that, especially with being remote. But having all of that and documented it, and having a Notion page and lots of different things in there with communication is very important.
I think just to make another point on this thing around turnover, right? It's like, not all turnover is bad turnover as well, right? As in, like, a lot of companies, you have to model this into the business, right? As in, you should expect a certain level of turnover at some point. It's like how much you're actually comfortable with, right? And then, like, certain, like, professional organization, I was in consulting like 15 years ago, way back at the start of my career. And there you have this upper out mentality, right? Which is like, hey, every year 20% of that workforce is going to leave because you're either up or out, right? And so you have to think about how this is specific to your business and be okay, and trying to understand what's the bands of turnover that you're comfortable with. And then, as you guys are kind of going into, which is what's the cause of it? Is it a bad onboarding process? Is it because there was a mismatch during the hiring process? Is that what's leading to the turnover, or is it something more fundamental, right? It's always digging into, like, what is causing it, and again, what level of turnover are you actually comfortable with. But I think it's like, not having any turnover is probably not healthy either, right? I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have no turnover.
That's awesome.
But it's funny. Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're doing some things great, but yeah, it's to be seen. We have a lot of questions, by the way, from the audience. So there's at least 5 or 6 of them, which will keep us busy for the next 20 minutes. So I'm wondering if I should ask the last question for our group here, which is how to deal with pressure to cut costs, reduce staffing, and become more efficient in an economic downturn, which we may or may not experience in the next year or so. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that, and then we'll go into the audience's questions.
Yeah, look, as I mentioned earlier, for better or for worse, this is just a reality. Having access to a global talent pool will give you access to some cost advantages as well. We see it every day. We have customers that are reducing their engineering teams in the US, but building engineering teams in Brazil, in India. So this is just a reality, right? So that's obviously a tool that exists today for companies that want to optimize their cost structures. But other than that, at the end of the day, it's a matter of priority, right? What is critical for your organization to continue moving, to continue growing, and what is something that it's a project that you were expecting to work on that you can table for now, right? And so that's kind of what's happening right now, or at least how we see it from our point of view.
I'm happy to provide so like I think as Carla was mentioning, like, the important thing is to think about, obviously, a lot of, especially in tech, right, most companies are going through these periods of layoffs mostly because they overhired as well, right? So it's like, hey, I anticipate my growth in a year's time is going to be XYZ. And then the reality is that, hey, maybe that's not going to be the case, right? So you plan for something that then didn't materialize. But in terms of thinking about, hey, is it performance-based? Can we, as Carlos was saying, reduce spending on these non-core projects, right, and refocus on the high-impact stuff that's actually going to move the needle for us in the short term? Because the reality is, like, most investors and things like that are much more short-term focused now. Again, very depends on your situation and your business, but that's the reality we're living in, I think. And then the last piece is around this, like, investing in automation, right, and process improvement, or so making people more productive effectively, not necessarily making them work harder or longer, but just making them more productive. And that has to do with, I think, how Bruno was saying, how do organizations communicate, all these different types of things, right? How do you actually work? And in terms of, maybe again, because that's my area of expertise, I can talk to you a little bit about how we see companies optimizing their benefits spend, which is essentially rationalizing the benefits programs through, like, these flexible budgets. And as Lona was saying, hey, can we go out and procure these group products so that we're making savings there, taking advantage of different tax advantage stuff in different markets. I'm always surprised by talking to benefits leaders and comp leaders around, hey, we're not taking advantage of a tax exemption in the UK or in Brazil or in wherever. So, like, looking at that, we think is very important. Consolidating the plans. When we're talking to, again, global leaders, you sometimes find that people are having these kind of domestic solutions in every market that may or may not be working for them, instead of putting everything into one solution like a SafetyWings or so. In other cases, it might be better breaking it down domestically. So it really just depends on the situation, right? And how many people and folks that you're looking at. And then, yeah, implementing automation, right? I think moving people from doing admin work and low impact tasks to high impact tasks, right? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of companies are saying, hey, let's just get rid of people without thinking about how can we upskill it, how can we make people more productive, getting rid of like the stuff that nobody wants to be doing in the first place, right? The administration, moving data around, moving paper around, which is, I think, something that I guess everybody in the panel here helps with, is like just more process efficiency, right? Cutting costs, and thinking about it in that way. Just some of the things that we see companies trying to do.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I mean,
I think.
Oh, sorry, Lana. Yeah, I was just gonna say, to wrap it up on my end would be like to communicate everything. You don't want anything to be a surprise for anyone in the company. And so even if you're thinking about major decisions like layoffs or even like cutting costs or something, to be able to communicate that with somewhat of a plan and a short, medium term news, well, I think it's a good thing to do, because you never want to happen to wake up one day, go to your laptop and get like a quick call, and all of a sudden you're just gone, right? And I think that's very important to manage, because it's people at the end of the day. Even though those people are responsible for bringing resources and productivity to the business, and they're assets in a lot of ways, they're people as well. They're humans, and they have their own lives, and I think that's really important.
The only thing, yeah, I 100% agree, Bruno. But the other thing that I would just say there is like, do it, whatever kind of do, try to take decisions quickly, right? Because the worst thing that can happen is like, hey, we are delaying things that we know and facing the reality. And again, we see a lot of companies doing that, or being like, hey, I don't want to look at the plan again because I know it's bad, right? And I think like the best companies, the best leaders that we see are like, no, actually, let's face it up. Let's do what we need to do now, and then rebase off of that, right? So like try to do things quickly.
Yeah, do it quickly, do it in one swoop, so it's not like continuous like laying off people.
Exactly.
And people are like wondering the next day what's going to happen. Okay, so we only have 15 minutes and we have a lot of questions. So maybe Charles, do you want to jump in here and maybe ask the question that is you've seen most asked potentially, and help us there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions here about just, is this webinar recorded? So yes, this webinar is recorded, so everybody will get a copy of it after, so I'll send it out. So, but the first question for the panel here, we've got 4, 5, 6 of them. I've heard the notion that remote working typically increases productivity, but harms innovation that requires more active, real-time collaboration that's best done with everyone in the same room. Does the panel agree? Why? Why not?
I mean, I don't agree, obviously, that everybody has to be in one place, because you will be more innovative. There are so many ways you can do that with a few things. One is having sync time with the strategy team every week, twice a week. We have that for 2 hours, and we innovate a lot during that time, and we are not in the same room. Another thing that we do at SafetyWing is that we have this offsites 4 times a year. So we have them in different fun locations. The next one is coming up in Bali in October, where we get the whole team together and we, work, we connect, we innovate. And it's one of the best things that the company can invest in versus having to invest in office space and paying for that, in my opinion. And it works quite well for us. So I wouldn't say that it harms innovation, in my opinion, but I'd love to hear what the others are saying.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lana, and I've been on both sides of the table. Obviously, I'm a 2-time founder, and my previous company, we were all working in an office, and my company today is fully remote, right? And I don't see any difference. The reality is that you just need to set up different processes. There's a communication challenge, as Bruno mentioned. Sometimes you have team members that are working in different time zones. And that's where a sync communication becomes important. But in terms of having sessions to brainstorm and to figure out solutions to problems that you're facing, it's the same thing. You can do it online, and there are a lot of great collaboration tools that you can leverage to do so. But it does require a mind shift, which is the most important thing, right? And so what we see here is that the people that struggle the most are the older generations, right? Versus the younger ones, Gen Zs, that are very, very adaptable, right? For them, it's a second nature. So we do see that difference between older kind of companies versus younger companies that move faster and don't really see this as a barrier. So no difference. I concur, Lone.
I mean, I think the reality is the in-person time is good for certain things, right? And as Lona, you were saying, like bringing people together through an offsite or something like that is super important. We are a hybrid team, so we have, you know, people who are distributed in Spain, Argentina, and everywhere. But we also have a base of people out of London mostly. And again, it's how do you use the time in the office, right? And you can get high productivity in the office or outside of the office. And the same thing, I think you can get high innovation in the office or outside of the office or people working from home. So it's just making sure you have the right processes and things together. And I still think like bringing people together in some way, shape, or form is still something that even like all of the remote companies do because it is really helpful, right? It's like Bruno was just saying he was out in the Bay Area last year and meeting some of the people in person for the first time. I think that's really, really important because you're building those relationships, right? And it's not enough to just be staring at a Zoom screen all day. But at the same time, I think you can get high innovation or low innovation. It's less about are people working from home or not. It's more about how you have the system set up in the correct way, right? And you can, I see teams do exceptionally well in both working from home and in the office, right?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. Different people, different things as well. Like if you think you're a person that you innovate or can do your best job in an office space full of people, go for it. If you think you can do that in a remote setting, go for it. If you think you can meet people throughout the year and make sure that you build meaningful connections online and in person, which is my case, then go for it, right? And I think that's quite important for you to figure out what type of person you are before you find what type of job fits you well. And also the company try to figure out like what's the process that they want to develop to make sure that happens. I mean, it's really hard for me to say harms innovation when I see companies. There are a ton of examples, but even in Oyster that grew, like started in January 2020, grew from the pandemic from 2 founders to 700 people almost in 70 plus countries. SafetyWing, same situation of high success throughout a period where people can actually even be together. And so it's kind of like hard for me to say that there's no innovation. Maybe if you're building a rocket, maybe you'll need to be in person every now and then to assemble the pieces. But most of the situations that we're building here are online products for people that are online. So it's really hard for me to think that we can't do it online either.
Great, thanks. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question here. I'm going to merge a couple together, and I think you all answered another question that we had, so I'm going to skip that one. Next question is, how can we reduce the current resignation trend, if not stopping it? People with multiple offers, etc. So I think if we can give the audience some tips on some things that they can do to prevent employees from leaving, that would be super helpful.
Again, I mean, I think we discussed this a little bit, right? In terms of, hey, what are the some of the most overlooked retention strategies? Ultimately, I think as Lona made the best point, which is like trying to understand why, right? And figuring out, hey, why are people leaving? Is it because you're not giving them flexibility? They don't have the right roles? What is that driving it? So I think one of the things that a lot of companies don't do as well as they should is like the common exit interview, right? When people are leaving, but not like a 15-minute chat, but like an hour chat of like, what's driving this? Was it the onboarding process? Was it you found something else better with different offers, but why? Do you not believe in the mission, etc.? So and actually going really deep on this, because only by talking to people and understanding it, you can figure out how you're going to fix it, right? Because you might if you don't do that, and you just, in our case, like would love people to do it, right? I'm just going to roll out these 30 new fancy benefits. That might make zero difference, right? If that's not the problem. So it really starts with understanding why are people leaving, and then going deep into, is it compensation? Are we not on market, right? Is it the flexibility element? Do people want to be working remote? Is there something wrong with the culture, the team, the manager? So it's really hard to give a blanket answer, but like going deep on the why, I think, is the most important thing.
That's excellent. And actually, it covers another question that was, what do I ask in the exit interview? So that's perfect. And Charles, let's move to the next question because we don't have a lot of time, but that was very good.
Perfect. Okay, so this one says, not quite on topic, but have you experienced any candidate fraud in hiring for remote jobs? Are there any red flags or trends to look for?
What do they mean? So like basically there was big news going around that like remote workers can work 2 or 3 jobs without really telling their employer. You know, like there was all this big news, and I thought this was really funny because at SafetyWing, which is really interesting, like the founders believe that people can be doing multiple things because they came from a kind of like a freelance background where, you know, people are able to, they have multiple talents, so they should be able to do multiple things. They don't have to be full time on only one thing. They can do other things. So actually at SafetyWing, it's encouraged that you do other things. Some people like me are founders of other companies. Because you bring that innovation from those things that you do, whether it's a fun thing that's on the side, whether it's a bar that you built in your town and you're designing it. There's so many things that like the team at SafetyWing does that is so interesting outside of their main core job, that brings so much value to the company and so much innovation for it to grow quicker, I believe. So also kind of like inspect or like look at inside yourself as a company and say, are we being, you know, too strict about this? Or, you know, do we have a good mission and vision? Do we have something great to offer people and they come here? Yeah, I don't think people would be bad. So I'd say have more trust, but that's just my thing. And been at SafetyWing for 2 years. We have 200 people and we haven't had any fraud so far, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just a quick point here, Carlos, and I'll give you the word as well. Like, if you're output driven, then if those people are just delivering that output, then what would be the problem, right? I think that's the whole thing. Is like if you shift your mindset from like working 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 to something like there's a quarterly goals, for example. With Oyster, we work with OKRs, and you're hitting those OKRs. Then if you do it for 2 companies and you like to do that, go for it.
That's exactly right, and I was going to make the same point, Bruno. It's you have to be objective focused, right? You cannot be focused on whether someone is doing something else while you know they should be working. No, you set the goals. You make sure that those goals are getting you know hit, and if that happens, everything's fine, right? Other than that, there's always you know information security concerns, right? When you're in a fully distributed organization, but that's another matter that, you know, our organization actually helps companies take care of that as well, right? But other than that, I mean, you know, those are kind of the 2 main things that you should focus on.
Excellent. David, we covered it, yeah? Okay, cool. There's more questions coming in, so let's quickly do one. I think I want to take this one. As a mother of new college graduates working remotely, and my observation is that they are losing those spontaneous opportunities to learn from others. How can this be compensated otherwise? I think this is a really good question, and it comes up a lot. And basically people are like, well, what about new graduates? You know, they never got that in-office experience. How do they kind of like network with others? I will speak from my experience, is that when I graduated from college, I thought that the worst idea in the world was to go in a concrete box, sit there for 9 hours, and then drive back and forth to it, which I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time, an hour traffic each way commute. So I decided not to get a job. And my parents are like, what? You graduated at the top of your class and you're not getting a job? I'm like, I don't want this kind of job. And you know, this was years ago. So I got like a job at a startup, which I convinced that I could work remotely. So I worked from Paris this summer, and then I started traveling the world, and I never went really back to an office, to be honest. But for me, it was never a problem not being in an office. I was meeting them in other places. So I was able to meet the team in other places, connect with them. But as long as I was like hitting my goals, I had this like ticket to freedom. That was the most important thing for me. Maybe some other people need that in office interaction, but I think others, you don't really have to have it to be successful. That's what I want to say.
I mean, I think as we made the point, I think a couple times, right, it all really depends on the personal situation and also how companies set themselves up to make sure that the graduates, the people who are coming in are junior, are set up for the success, right, and being supported in that way. And just because you're in the office doesn't mean that's any better or worse, right? Some companies do this terribly in the office as well. And so I don't think it's like related to being remote or not. It's more about how do you give people, yes, the opportunity to connect and things if they're working remotely, but they can do that virtually just as well as they could physically, right? So No.
Perfect. Charles, can we take one more question before the white paper webinar?
Yeah. And so for everybody that's still hanging on here in our audience, yeah, we do have that second session coming up here in just a minute. One more question I thought was an interesting one that just came in. How do you reduce mass resignations due to colleagues relocating abroad for work or to further their education? This is a major problem with many organizations in Nigeria where I reside and work.
I can answer the question. I've seen this a lot. So basically, it's countries that don't usually offer traditional opportunities to their people. And this is basically the immigration that we've seen in the last 100 years, people moving countries for better opportunities. But I think that remote work has the power to end migration and immigration. Because now people can access remote jobs from wherever they are in the world. So whether you're in Nigeria, in Albania, in India, you don't have to necessarily leave your country. And this is something really, really cool because in the past, you had to like move your whole life. I mean, I was an immigrant in the US and I came here in '95 because there was no opportunities in my country. But now with broadband and super fast internet and access to a computer, I could have had a great life in Albania and actually pay a lower cost of living and get paid a lot more money and really have an awesome life. So to that, I would say really educate those colleagues that opportunities can be accessed where they are, and going abroad is not necessarily better than what they have in their country. There needs to be a PR kind of thing there. But I realize we're at time, guys, so I want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time. I know Bruno had to drop off. David, thank you. Carlos, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Everyone that joined us, thank you so much. Please do stay on because we have an amazing white paper we want to share with you. It's on retention, so it's going to answer a lot of the questions you guys have and the questions that we weren't able to answer. Actually, what I'll do is maybe call on stage the next panelist.